Dr. Hüther talked about this sort of link between a free market and free people, but I'm thinking of also the statistic that Melissa Chan presented that a sizable proportion of young people are like, well, look, if democracy can't deliver and a leader needs to ignore some of the rules in order to improve the economy, I need a job right now. Felix, what do you make of that sentiment?
Well, I think that thank you, first of all, for the opportunity. Thank you for your remarks as well, and for this platform. I think it's a very common feeling, but we need to talk about these things, more often. And one of the perspectives that I want to bring here as a president of the World Liberty Congress is precisely the role of business in this global erosion of democracy. And I'd like to start by pointing out the myth that autocracies, when related to business and investment, are stable, predictable, profitable. That is, of course, not the case in very well-established democracies. But when you ask why just to use an example, some of the most perverse dictatorships in the world, which is Cuba, continues to receive investments in tourism, or in Nicaragua, where I come from, where investments in gold exploration has multiplied by 5 times. Or we can speak about the oil industry in Venezuela, and we continue to see what we're seeing with rare earth explorations in Africa. And yes, there was a point in which certain industries were particularly attractive for European investors when it came to regulations. So autocrats are very good at offering certain deals that, of course, if you have the option of, let's say, do an investment in a democracy that requires a number of regulations, playing by the book, doing all your environmental impact studies, and suddenly you have another autocracy that offers you the same deal with very little bottlenecks. But now we have a new player in the game, which is China. And I think that the conversation regarding business, global competition, competitiveness, and the attitudes such as the one that you mentioned has to take into the equation that by going into those industries and those countries, basically, those who do it are financing repression. And that's basically the opening point that I wanted to make.
Rushan, I mean, that's an obvious point for you to come in. We've seen kind of a general failure for Europe to regulate forced labor with regard to textiles coming out of Xinjiang. What's stopping this from happening?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here, and I'm really grateful for this week, for the Axel Springer and World Liberty Congress. As an Uyghur, I just want to quickly give a background on what's happening to Uyghurs today. In my homeland, being rich in oil, gas, cotton, polysilicon, uranium, and rare minerals should have brought dignity and the opportunity for my people. But instead, China exploits them to fuel its global ambitions and making us targets of genocide. Forced labor, censorship, and Uyghur identities being systematically erased. Our language is banned, our religion is being criminalized, and wealth is stolen. Millions are imprisoned in the concentration camps, and about 1 million Uyghur children are sent to state-run orphanages. Uyghur women's bodies are being the battleground of this genocide. They are subject to forced sterilization, forced abortion, forcibly marrying to Han Chinese men. And all this actually, the Chinese government calling poverty alleviation in the guise of economic empowerment, but it's propaganda masking modern slavery, while governments and the corporations still turn blind eye. The Uyghur genocide is woven into the fabric of our daily lives, in the tomatoes and the seafood and the shoes you wear or purse you use, everything in your daily lives, including the toys that our children play. The world's clean energy and the technology revolution are built on the backs of enslaved Uyghurs. Critical minerals like copper, lithium, uranium, and still bear the fingerprints of the Uyghur forced labor. And Beijing is draining the life force out of my people to export cheap, dirty energy to the world. It's turning the suffering of entire nation into profit and the geopolitical power. Until the world confronts that truth, the word progress will remain empty of justice, freedom, and the human dignity. In the past 20 years, land usage or land transfer from the Uyghurs folded 50 times. So basically, the Uyghur farmers are losing their lands and then becoming slaves. Just the 2024, last year, 3.4 million Uyghurs were transferred from their homes and they worked on the supply chains. Nearly 30% of solar-grade polysilicon comes from my homeland, produced in coal-powered factories by Uyghur slaves. So corporate leaders and the companies, they must understand that the ethical responsibility is not charity. It's essential for a free and a stable world. And China's technologically enabled this genocide against Uyghurs is a blueprint for the world, actually. Today, I come here to speak to you at the cost of my own sister's freedom. I spoke about China's genocide, outlining the fate of my in-laws. 24 members of my husband's family went missing to the camps. So I talked about this in September 2018 in the Hudson Institute in Washington. Then 5 days later, they took my own sister, a retired medical doctor. So today, when I talk about corporate complicity, my sister may have worked on the shirt on your back. So please think about it. You know, when the people use the product, the goods manufactured by those Uyghur slaves, making all of us are not just the complicit, but enablers of this genocide. So every product has a history. The question is whether that story reflects dignity or genocide. Decades ago, a wall stood here on one separate, on that separated people, families, and ideas. It fell because citizens refused to live a lie. Today, we face a different kind of wall, one built of profit and denial. And like the wall that once divided the city, it can be torn down when people decide that justice, human dignity, and a free society are worth the cost, and when we all choose the courage over complicity, refuse to enable Beijing's modern slavery and the genocide. And my sister remains in prison, and her story is not finished. The Uyghurs are still facing full-fledged active genocide. So the choice is ours, and the time to act is now, because we are all responsible for what happens next.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your family's story. Just a quick follow-up. Whose responsibility is it to avoid perpetuating this through commercial action? Is it up to individual citizens to boycott these products, or should governments be blocking them? To you, Rushan.
The governments should implement the import bans, because any country's constitution should not allow to bring the goods manufactured by slaves in today's world. Mm-hmm. So the government should implement legislations like we have in the United States, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act.
All right, thank you. Professor Dr. Hüther, throwing a controversial one to you, there's been a lot of discussion about boycotting Israeli products to fight against what's happening in Gaza, to fight against what's happening in the settlements. Is that an appropriate response?
I think the most important point is they have strong institutions in these countries, and strong institutions, which one most important target is to make power contestable. Political power and economic power. Political power via the system we have in a democracy, via the constitutional rules and procedures defined in parliament and all the elections, and engaging the civil society, which is also part of the public sphere. And on the other hand, to make economic power contestable, you need competition So that means everybody who wants to be part of the system has to be the chance to become part of the economic system, has to be a fair chance. That's what we are doing in our welfare system and our education system. We heard about from Minister Prien that the education system is so important to organize the self-empowerment of people as part of this free order. So there should be no exit, no barriers to entry and no barriers to exit in all these systems. So it's the same story. We heard a lot about political mismanagement and corruption and the coercion of economic actors and political actors. That's not in line with my interpretation or my ethical based or in definition of market economy and democracy and market economy of two sides of one coin. These are both based on freedom and responsibility for the individual as well as the politicians engaged. So I think this is very important if we bring this message via our market-based companies to the world. Not every day it will work in this way, but it's a perspective.
Felix, I wanted to ask you about an interesting point that I found from my research. You have talked about how anti-money laundering laws and the norms-based international banking system is actually being used against activists. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why you've actually endorsed the use of Bitcoin for activists?
Absolutely. As we've seen in different conversations, autocrats are becoming more sophisticated. They're actually using the rules, the regulations, the infrastructure that was developed to protect the global democratic ecosystem. In fact, many of them use language that may sound democratic in certain spaces, and they're doing exactly the same when it comes to the international financial system. Let me give you a concrete example. A few decades ago, when a regime wanted to go after a non-profit organization that does investigative journalism, they will say that such journalist or human rights defender was an agent of the CIA. They realize that doesn't work anymore. So what they're doing is that they're putting investigative journalists, opposition politicians in a list of money laundering, narco trafficking. They're using AML regulations to debank activists. So at the World Liberty Congress, we have partnered with other organizations, with human rights foundations and other institutions, and we actually realized that the problem is huge. I can give you my personal example. You ask me why? Well, because I tried for 2 years to have a bank account in the US, despite the fact that I've worked for private equity firms and I've been VP of a Fortune 500 company in Latin America in the past. Yet, after being a politician who was arrested for announcing my intentions to run as president, after 2 years in prison, deported from Nicaragua to the United States, found myself without nationality, impossible to open a bank account. And then we realized through the World Liberty Congress that more than 60% of the activists in exile have the same problem. That is called financial repression. We start to find alternatives, and we realize that Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer technology. We're not endorsing Bitcoin as a crypto from an investment perspective. Simply, it's a tool for freedom for us. And now we have a new resolution recently approved by the World Liberty Congress that gives us the mandate as World Liberty Congress to train our activists in Bitcoin in order precisely to have financial freedom, the same freedom that was stolen by these autocrats.
Rushan, I see you're nodding your head, and I know that China has also taken steps to harass activists, in dissidents in other countries.
Transnational repression is a huge problem for all of us, actually. My sister's example is one. And also disinformation they are spreading, all kinds of threats we are receiving, death threats and the harassments and the digital harassments. And they are making memes and the deep fake, using our voices and the fake videos to create problem among our communities. And as you mentioned earlier, I just published my book, and it was in June. Now I've got 2 fake books that's being published just to dilute our stories and to confuse the audiences. So the countries really need to recognize this transnational repression as a criminal act. And the businesses too. When I answered you earlier, I just said one part, the countries, but the businesses actually really needs to end the complicity by not using the supply chains that's tainted by Uyghur slaves' blood, sweat, and the tears. If not do it for the Uyghurs, just to do it for your own interest, for your own country's national security. I mean, when it comes down to business owners, how do you compete with the free labor? How that's going to impact your business? So it's really important to think about which side of the history the business leaders and the countries and the people wants to be. The side with the tyranny, who's trying to silence all of us, because the silence is the oxygen of the tyranny, and we need to unplug that power line.
Okay. Thank you. Last point, and that gives me a good segue to my last point with Felix. So the U.S. trade representative is now saying it wants to put major tariffs on Nicaragua by saying there's unfair competition because they're not paying their workers. You apparently were called by the Trump transition team last year, and your comments are cited in this U.S. trade rep report. Everybody's looking to find their Trump whisperer. How are you? How have you had this success in making the case for democracy through this White House?
Well, in the concrete case of Nicaragua, of course, Nicaragua is at the center of my heart, even though I work, globally with the World Liberty Congress, is that we consider that it's immoral that a dictatorship is using a free trade agreement to actually violate the labor rights of Nicaraguans. Nicaragua is a dictatorship, and yet there are many companies, particularly in the textile industry, also the cigar industry, I should say, which is painful as much as I love cigars, that using that trade agreement in order to make these companies more competitive, they're violating the human rights of workers. And what we have been doing precisely is to show the evidence. And we have mobilized, I think it's a case study. So recently, we were able to call the attention of the administration. We were not able to do that with the previous administration, but we are now having a hearing at the U.S. Trade Commission, and hopefully that agreement will be open to discussions, if I could put it in diplomatic terms. So how to do it? Hard work, and work from a very technical perspective. So we have been showing documented cases of severe human rights abuses of labor unions. I think that's very important. It's a lesson learned, and at the same time, speak the language of the rule of law.
Okay. All right. With that, I'll thank our panel. Really appreciate you joining us. Round of applause for them. Thank you.